Good Sunday morning, everyone, and welcome into today's daily Bible reading for June the 25th. Today, we are beginning a read through the book of the Judges. The book of the Judges. It is quite a change in scenery for us after having read through Joshua, where there was so much success that was accomplished and experienced by the people of God. And of course, that was because they were faithful to Him. They trusted in Him. They obeyed Him for the vast majority of the book. There was loyalty to the covenant that was on full display, and for that they were able to conquer and enjoy a very successful conquest. However, as we turn the page to Judges, what we really see is the anti-conquest narrative come to the forefront of the story. It is a cycle, unfortunately, of gloom and despair that begins. Well, it begins in a not too terrible of a way, but then eventually it just, it spirals out of control. I actually have a good little graphic here that I will share with you. I think does a good job of really showing us what the Judges cycle is going to look like. Let me pull it up real fast for you and show you. The first chapter that we're going to read today shows some success. There are some within Israel who experienced success as they were engaged in the conquest. And yet what we're going to see as well is the unfortunate reality that there were many who failed. There were many who fell short of the expectation that was there for them concerning their conquest of the land. It again begins on a decent note and just kind of goes downhill from there. I'll show you this cool diagram here that I got from a couple of resources, a couple of friends who did some work through this text a while back. Again, it begins with the prologue, what we see in the first two chapters and some change, and then the real story of the judges, which is very interesting that they are referred to as judges when really they are more so just warlords. They are those who really engage in a lot of battle and a lot of bloodshed. Again, you would think that being engaged in battle would lead to good results, but unfortunately what we see is things just get worse and worse as you make your way through the Judges' story and the downward spiral and cycle that you see. It begins with unfaithfulness from the people. Yahweh sends a judge or a deliverer of sorts. The people will repent, they'll get back in the right way, and then they will become unfaithful again. So it begins on a decent note, and it just ends really down in the dumps, looking through all these various judges here that you see on the screen, have them grouped together in the way that they're grouped together within the text itself. You can see that there. So with that said, I'm going to take this down and we'll get to reading here in Judges chapter 1. But again, just keep in mind the context of Judges, which is Joshua 24, 14 through 24, which talks about they were faithful during the time of Joshua and during the time of those who worked with Joshua as the elders of Israel. But remember, he foretold their unfaithfulness. He says, you will not serve Yahweh. They made the dedication to serve Yahweh. He says, you're not going to. And whenever you rebel against him, you're going to be punished for that. And again, unfortunately, that's what we see. Judges retells and reverses the conquesting of the promised land. Let me see here. I'm just going to read off a few notes that I have here. It serves as a bridge from Joshua to Ruth to show how you end up finding this family in Ruth, or not in Ruth, in her eventual family. Remember, Ruth is a Moabitess, but her family that she marries into, and Naomi, they end up going back. How do you get from Joshua to this family that was in the promised land, leaving the promised land, and being involved in with Moabites? Well, Judges is how you get from that place where, again, things start well and they end up really poorly. One person said that Joshua or Judges begins with the people inquiring of God, but it ends with people doing what is right in their own eyes. To really sum it up, Israel becomes Canaan throughout the story of the Judges. And again, while I was mentioning earlier, the Judges are not judges in the sense we think, robes and gavels, but instead they are strong military figures, warlords. They're sometimes seen as a deliverer within a military context, and most often they're really not good people. They actually end up being pretty bad, not exactly stalwarts of faithfulness. One brother said, if you try to control what God tells you to destroy, it will end up destroying you. And that's what we really see throughout the book is they don't do the cleansing of the land that Yahweh expects, especially what we're going to see in chapter 1 is that they failed really strongly. And what we see in the few failures at the end of Joshua, those failures begin to multiply in the book of the Judges, even within the first chapter, and really sets the scene for many of the failures that we see within the book. So now that you think that Judges is a complete downer, because I mean, really, overall, I think it really is. It's not a positive story in the grand scheme of the narrative of Israel. It's really, I think, a low point and just gets worse as we continue through the text. But there's a number of really, really important lessons that I believe we can learn from it. So I'm really excited that Judges is one of the more interesting reads, I think, in the Old Testament, just because there's so much that is here, so much that can be learned from. I think it's great from a literary perspective as well. So I hope that this will be a blessing to us as we read through Judges. And make sure you have maybe a fan near you, maybe a little spritzing bottle, because some have called Judges the dumpster fire of the Old Testament because of so many of the bad decisions that are committed during this writing. But nonetheless, let's go ahead and get reading here in Judges chapter 1 and verse number 1. Judges chapter 1 and verse number 1. After the death of Joshua, the Israelites inquired of Yahweh, who will be the first to fight for us against the Canaanites? And Yahweh answered, Judah is to go. Remember, Judah is really taking a prominent spot within the tribes of Israel. Judah is to go. I have handed the land over to him. Judah said to his brother Simeon, come with me to my allotted territory and let's fight against the Canaanites. I will also go with you to your allotted territory. So Simeon went with him. When Judah attacked, Yahweh handed the Canaanites and Perizzites over to them. They struck down 10,000 men in Bezek. They found Adonai Bezek in Bezek, fought against him, and struck down the Canaanites and the Perizzites. When Adonai Bezek fled, they pursued him, caught him, and cut off his thumbs and big toes. Adonai Bezek said, 70 kings with their thumbs and big toes cut off used to pick up scraps under my table. God has repaid me for what I have done. They brought him to Jerusalem, and he died there. The men of Judah fought against Jerusalem, captured it, and put it to the sword and set the city on fire. Afterward, the men of Judah marched down to fight against the Canaanites who were living in the hill country, the Negev, and the Judean foothills. Judah also marched against the Canaanites who were living in Hebron. Hebron was formerly named Kiriath Arba. They struck down Sheshai, Ahiman, and Talmai. From there, they marched against the descendants of Debir. Debir was formerly named Kiriath Sephir. Caleb said, whoever attacks and captures Kiriath Sephir I will give my daughter Aksah to him as a wife. So Othniel, son of Kenaz, Caleb's youngest brother, captured it, and Caleb gave his daughter Aksah to him as his wife. When they arrived, she persuaded Othniel to ask her father for a field. As she got off her donkey, Caleb asked her, what do you want? And she answered him, give me a blessing. Since you have given me land in the Negev, give me springs also. So Caleb gave her both the upper and lower springs. The descendants of the Kenites, Moses' father-in-law, that's Jethro, had gone up from the men of Judah, with the men of Judah from the city of palms to the wilderness of Judah, which was in the Negev of Arad. They went to live among the people. Judah went with his brother Simeon, struck the Canaanites who were living in Zephath, and completely destroyed the town. So they named the town Hormah. Judah captured Gaza and its territory, Ashkelon and its territory, and Ekron and its territory. Yahweh was with Judah and enabled them to take possession of the hill country, but they could not drive out the people who were living in the plain because those people had iron chariots. Judah gave Hebron to Caleb, just as Moses had promised, and Caleb drove out the 3 sons of Anak who lived there. At the same time, the Benjaminites did not drive out the Jebusites who were living in Jerusalem. The Jebusites had lived among the Benjaminites in Jerusalem to this day. The house of Joseph also attacked Bethel, and Yahweh was with them. They sent spies to Bethel, the town formerly known as Luz, and the spies saw a man coming out. of the town and said to him, "Please show us how to get into the town, and we will show you kindness." When he showed them the way into the town, they put the town to the sword, but released the man and his entire family. Then the man went to the land of the Hittites, built a town, and named it Luz, which is its name still today. At that time, Manasseh failed to take possession of Beth Shean and Taanach and their surrounding villages, or the residents of Dor, Ibleam, and Megiddo, and their surrounding villages. The Canaanites were determined to stay in the land. When Israel became stronger, they made the Canaanites serve as forced labor, but never drove them out completely. At that time, Ephraim failed to drive the Canaanites out who were living in Gezer. So the Canaanites have lived among them in Gezer. Zebulun failed to drive out the residents of Kitron or the residents of Nahalo. So the Canaanites lived among them and served as forced labor. Asher failed to drive out the residents of Akko or Sidon or Alab, Akzib, Helba, Afik, or Rehob. The Asherites lived among the Canaanites who were living in the land because they failed to drive them out. Naphtali did not drive out the residents of Beth Shemesh or the residents of Beth Anath. They lived among the Canaanites who were living in the land, but the residents of Beth Shemesh and Beth Anath served as their forced labor. The Amorites forced the Danites into the hill country and did not allow them to go down into the valley. The Amorites were determined to stay in Haharez, Aijalon, and Sha'al Beam. When the house of Joseph got the upper hand, the Amorites were made to serve as forced labor. The territory of the Amorites extended from the Scorpion's Ascent, that is from Selah, upward. And that is Judges chapter 1. Again, we see the book really starting in a good place. This is not a bad start, that the Israelites inquired of Yahweh, because now their leader is gone and they're wondering, okay, well, who is going to lead us as we continue to take greater control of the land of Canaan? Who's going to lead us? And he chooses Judah. Remember, Judah has taken a prominent role within the sons of Joseph, or excuse me, the sons of Jacob, because the two oldest sons, Reuben and Simeon, both had great transgressions. So the leadership role has fallen to Judah. And yet Judah doesn't go alone. He calls Simeon and says, "Hey, Simeon, you come over here and help me, and then I'll go over there to your place and I will help you." And when they attacked, they had success. They attacked the Canaanites, the Perizzites. They struck down 10,000 men of Bezek, and they even are able to take the king of Bezek, whose name is Adonai Bezek, the Lord of Bezek, and they fought against him. But instead of just destroying him as they should have, they actually end up just trying to humiliate him, and they do so through becoming like him. They act like a pagan in the way that they treat this man, by cutting off his thumbs and cutting off his toes. And he even admits, hey, this is what I did to other people. And yet that's what they act like. So even in the success, I think there are some beginning signs of not being the holy and set apart people of God, but becoming like the Canaanites that they are supposed to be ridding the land of. They continue to fight against those who are in Jerusalem. They set the city on fire. They march against the Canaanites who are living in the hill country, in the Negev, the Judean foothills. They strike down a number of individuals, the Judahites do. So again, mostly we're seeing success, although again, the way they handled Adonai Bezek, I don't believe is good. I don't believe they handled that the way they should have. Caleb is talked about in verses 12 through 15. Again, this story is repeated from Joshua chapter 15 and verses 13 through 19. We see the descendants of Moses' father-in-law. They come and they end up settling among the people of Canaan. Again, that's not good. That's not what we're wanting to see. Judah goes with Simeon, and they fight against those who were, I assume that this is in Simeon's area. They fight against those individuals there. They're able to capture Gaza and its territory and such. Yahweh was with them as they were fighting. They were able to have success in the hill country, but the text says that they could not drive out those who were in the valley because they had these chariots of iron, which this is a reference, I think, to something similar to what we saw back in Joshua chapter 17 and verse 16, where the descendants of Joseph were talking about how they were not able to take the land that Joshua was giving them because they had iron chariots. So how was it that they had success in the hill country but not in the valley? Is that because of God? No, I think it's because they doubted, and they actually feared those who had superior technology to them. And because they feared and did not trust in Yahweh, they were not able to have success. And we see Caleb mentioned again in verse number 20. Old man Caleb, he wasn't afraid of giants. He was ready to take on whoever he needed to because he trusted fully in Yahweh. But again, we think about continuing military failures, and that's really what we see, I think, throughout the rest of the chapter. It's just fail after fail after fail after fail. The Benjamites did not drive out the Jebusites. The Jebusites lived among them to this day. That's not good. They were not to do that. They were to rid the land of the pagans. I have a subheading at the beginning of verse 22 that says success for the house of Joseph, but I don't really think I would call this success because they still did not do what they were supposed to do. We see that they attacked Bethel and Yahweh was with them. They sent spies. There's a lot of Jericho echoes here. They sent spies into the city. They run across a man. They say, hey, will you help us get into the city? If you do that, we'll deliver you. He says, sure, I'll show you. So he does that. They let him go. But the big difference between this individual and his family and Rahab's family is that Rahab confessed faith in Yahweh. And she actually joined herself to the community of Israel. That's why she ends up being in the lineage of Jesus. But this man, they let him go, and all he does is go to a different area and basically recreate Bethel. Remember, going back to Genesis chapter 28, this place was originally called Luz. So Luz is changed to Bethel, and then the Israelites take Bethel, but this man just goes somewhere else and restarts a new pagan city of Luz. So that's not what God wanted either. So it's not exactly pure success as we might think about it. Manasseh failed to take possession. Ephraim failed to drive out the Canaanites. Zebulun failed to drive out the residents of the area. Asher failed to drive out. Naphtali did not drive out. The Danites were their rear ends were just kicked from the jump. We see a number of failures here in chapter 1, and it really just sets the scene for what we're going to see throughout the text of Judges, as I mentioned. And it goes back to some of the seeds of failure that were planted at the end of Joshua. Again, they were not pervasive as I would see here in chapter 1 of Judges, but there were failures, and those failures seem to have been planted, and they seem to grow and multiply. And that's why we have a number of failures here in the beginning of Judges. Again, all of the success that they had in the conquest, it's really unraveling. It's really becoming undone by the failures of the people in the Judges story. So we'll keep looking at that as we work our way throughout the Judges. A lot of these chapters are pretty long, so we're not going to be reading, I don't think, double chapters all that much. We'll take our time reading through here and dissecting the text as we go. And what we're going to see in chapter 2 is that, yes, they had military failures. It really sets the stage for that in chapter 1. But a lot of this really gets back to the spiritual failures of the people, which is going to be highlighted in Judges chapter 2 that we'll read on Monday. Hope that you tune in for that. If you have any questions about the opening chapter of Judges, please feel free to leave that in the comments section below. I'll do my best to address those as best I can. And I do hope that you're excited for this new read. Again, I think it'll be really beneficial. Actually, a friend and I did a much more in-depth study of Judges back during the whole COVID thing. And we really started in Genesis and worked our way through a bunch of the beginning books of the Bible and of the Old Testament, and then it just kind of fell off. But if you want to do some more reading here in Judges, I'll be more than happy to point you to that, or point you to some other friends of mine who did some really, really good work through Judges during the COVID time as well. Again, just a lot of good material I think is out there to help us understand the Judges in a good way, and I think to recognize them in the way that we should recognize them. I would say probably in my lifetime, the Judges were often shown as being these real heroes in the text, and I think they start off okay. Othniel's fine. I mean, Shamgar's like a Jewish ninja. He's really cool. I think Ehud, he does some neat things as well. But man, once you get past them and look at these other ones, I think we really see some strong weaknesses, some really glaring weaknesses in the character and faithfulness of these individuals. But again, this is written for our learning, so we can learn from them and acknowledge the mistakes they made, so that we can hopefully not make similar mistakes in our own context of when we're living today in the 21st century. A lot of things I think that are applicable to us today, we'll see as we move through the book of the Judges. Again, have any questions, put those below, and I hope you'll join in again tomorrow as we read together from Judges chapter 2. Here in just a little bit, we'll be gathering for our Bible studies and our worship assembly. Since last week was Father's Day, and I focused on a different type of lesson than our normal regularly scheduled programming, which is the third Sunday focusing on Mark. We're going to be reading through Mark chapter 4, verses 35 through 41 today, reading about Jesus calming the storm. It's a short text, but very powerful and really important for us as we are continuing to develop the story that Mark is painting for us here within his gospel account. Really excited to work through that text with you here in just a little bit. Again, thanks for tuning in. Hope we'll see you tomorrow. Take care. God bless.